Melbourne is no longer the world capital of coffee. The new world capital of coffee is Paris.
Paris! Womp, womp, womp.
But every single year I go back, there's like another 5 cafes that are absolutely amazing. And the crazy thing is, these cafes are all busy. There are people out there paying 20, 30 euros for a filter.
You know what I'm hearing, Ryan? It's just
It's
coffee.
just coffee.
Hits the road.
Patty!
I'm Simon Gautherin. I've been in the coffee industry for over 10 years. I'm the mastermind behind water that makes your coffee taste better. We are millions of years away from imagining how good espresso could be if we had optimal water. Guess how old the average coffee producer in Colombia is?
No idea.
New generations don't want to work in farms because it's hard work, the reward is not there, and we're going to struggle finding coffee no matter where you are in the world. Espresso tastes terrible, and that's because of the water that we use.
Welcome back to another episode. I am your host, Rowan Cook. I make coffee on the internet.
And I'm Ben Bicknell. I judge people who make coffee, but only in competitions.
And together we are
It's Just Coffee!
The podcast for people who know it's never just coffee. Now, a lot of people might think that barista competitions could be a little inaccessible, maybe a little pretentious, or some might say wanky.
I don't know if I'd use that term, but
I would. I did.
You did. Look, there's some truth into it. It can be a little bit of a niche, but the reality is that it's also home for a huge amount of innovation that we see kind of filter down into the everyday coffee world. So everything from scales and brew ratios and the use of tools like WDT and even kind of some of the milk blending that's happening, it all generally started on the competition stage.
Yep, and that brings us to today's guest that we have in. We've got Simon Gautherin of Zest Coffee and co-founder of APAX Labs. Now, Simon is no stranger to competitions, and now the APAX Lab mineral concentrates are used by world champions from around the world. I think we were talking earlier and you were saying something like 80% of the competitors in brewing competitions are using APAX Labs now? Is that right?
88% in the World Championship.
In the World Championship. So a lot of people using that. And so we can talk about a lot of these innovations.
Yeah, and so it'll be good. I think today is just a bit of a round table where we can unpack some of the gadgets, the tools, the techniques that have been used on stage, have a chat about what's worked, what maybe hasn't quite worked as well, and then look at how can we actually take some of those innovations and put them to use in our everyday coffee making.
Yeah, welcome to the show, Simon.
Woo!
Thank you very much for having me.
Don't go anywhere. We're going to have a quick word from one of our sponsors, APAX Lab. Elevate your coffee experience with APAX Lab Mineral Concentrates. APAX Lab's precision-engineered formulas, including tonic, jam, and lilac, are designed to enhance the coffee's natural flavors. Not going to change it, it's just going to enhance it. It's going to bring out the vibrant acidity, the rich sweetness, or if you use lilac, it might bring out those delicate floral notes that you've been looking for. Trusted by world-class cafes and even barista champions, APAX Lab helps you unlock your coffee's full potential. Discover more at apaxlab.com. Wait, where was that again, Sonam?
The internet.
Oh, okay. Thought I was going to say the website. Thanks.
Today's episode is brought to you by our amazing sponsors at Eco Barista. The reason I sound like this is because they got massages at our stand at Mice, and so I'm getting a massage while recording this message for you. They're the best sponsor of the pod that we could have had. They have the best eco products. This probably sounds really pornographic, but it's not. I'm just getting a massage. They have the best eco-friendly coffee products. They got coffee bags that you can design yourself. They got cups, they got iced coffee cups. They got everything you need. So make sure to support them because they support us. Head to ecobarista.com.au and get 15% off your first purchase when you sign up. Oh, mama, that's good.
Good to be back.
Yeah. Now, obviously, it makes a lot of sense having you in because A, you do compete, and B, APAX has to be one of the biggest things being used in competitions right now. Like we're seeing it kind of
innovation.
It's a hot innovation. So it kind of makes sense just to pack through that. Now, the biggest, I thought we'd start simple, right? And then we'll, get a little crazier as we move through. But the biggest one is probably just the scale, right? Like that kind of really took vogue from competitions.
Yeah. And I think for folks who, are maybe newer into the industry, you're lucky. You've grown up in a world where scales are the norm. But certainly it was quite a big change. I reckon it would have been maybe like 2000 and 2008, where it really started kind of becoming more mainstream.
And it took 5 to 10 years to make its way to cafes afterwards. But yeah, the first scales in competition that would have been around that time.
Yeah. And I think it was just that move from looking at your extraction in like a shot glass with a line on it that was 30 milliliters apparently, and then going to something way more recipe driven. I think the impact's been huge though in the coffee industry around.
Even stuff that I would do back when I was working the cafe, you'd look at the cup and I'd be like, because if the coffee was fresh, the crema would be filled up to the 30 milliliter mark or whatever, but there'd be like barely any actual liquid coffee in it.
Yeah.
I started out, we had like the clicker grinder where you like distribute by going click, click. The first cafe it's 3 of those. Make sure that it's filled up, click, click, click. Then the next one, when we were fancy, I'd get the knife and I'd chop the top and I'd flatten it off and then tamp down because that's the perfect way to dose. But yeah, then brew ratios kind of came in and it started as the 1 to 2. One thing I will say though, these rules sometimes do get people a little stuck. Like you speak to a lot of baristas and it's just, they love a rule of what the perfect coffee is. 18 in, 36 out. That's the perfect recipe. That's how it's done. So sometimes I think it takes away a little of the magic of experimentation, but experiment. Try different brew ratios, brew recipes, manipulate the flavors.
Yeah, I think everyone wants to have this quick hack to improve coffee at home. And a lot of the time, that's why you see a lot of people get very interested with new tools that you know that come out, because people think that, oh, maybe I can hack the quality of my coffee by buying this new tool and maybe suddenly I can improve my coffees. But the reality is, there's a lot of experimentation to do and there's often more technique and knowledge involved than just tools themselves.
Yeah. And I guess as we kind of look at some of these different tools, techniques, there's probably 2 different kind of avenues, right? One is how we can measure things. And so it's like the capability for us to kind of have a clear picture of how we're making coffee, and the other is directly impacting the coffee, right? So, and I guess scales were that foundational baseline of like, okay, now we have good information about how much coffee is going in, how much is coming out, and often it was also facilitating contact time as well, because a lot of the scales have got timers kind of built into it. And so once you have that data set, it's kind of like we had Ann Cooper on the podcast recently, and she was just all about the data recording so that then you can reflect on what the outcome was. And I think that's the big thing with scales, is that they allow you to go, okay, I know my brew ratio, I know my recipe. Now I can see what these other things can affect and come back and refine that.
So I think for our listeners at home, maybe, or even, working as a barista, that's kind of the takeaway here is don't just go I've got a brew recipe. The best thing you can do with the scale is write down what you're making and then adjust from there so that you can see where it's going.
Yeah.
Also, a great thing about scale is if you have a home machine, and even if you're not that into coffee or don't care that much, get one, because it's going to save you so much with wastage and trying to dial in. You'll dial in 2 to 3 times quicker if you're using a scale, because what people don't know is when you change the grind size, it's also going to change the dose that's going to come out, and everything is out of whack. So if you measure the dose, variables gone.
And if you if you make a coffee and you love that coffee, that's the only way you can make that same coffee the next day.
Yes,
and
exactly.
I think that's the biggest takeaway from scales. It's the ability to replicate what you're doing. I mean, understand what you're doing, first of all, because you're not navigating in the dark, but also being able to replicate that. And that's literally the first thing that I bought to my dad when he was kind of getting serious about making coffee at home. I mean, making coffee with a French press. But what I told him is the first thing you need is a scale, because that's how you can make the same coffee every single day. And that's how it all came out from competitions. People wanted to make the same coffee on stage that they did backstage, or that they did a roastery or at their cafe. And the only way you could do that is by, measuring everything. So that consistency, was definitely key with scales.
I think it's interesting as well that when I was talking with the team from Akaya, the scale company, who probably were one of the biggest, drivers for that movement. But there's some visual kind of misconceptions, I guess, or misconceptions is the wrong word. But if you rely on your visual cues for how much coffee you're dosing, it can look very, very similar. So you're like, I don't need to weigh this one. I don't need to look at it. But if you're changing your coffee, things like the grind size, you can have two different grind sizes that look visually very different, but actually weigh the same. And then particle distribution and static and all those things, like the volume of space it visually looks like it's filling versus the actual weight can be quite different.
I did a video about like not using scoops and using a scale. And I think we had our Kenyan lighter roast coffee and then our signature blend medium dark roast. And one scoop was 16 grams and the other scoop was 21 grams. So we're not talking a couple like 0.1 of a gram. Sometimes you're looking at like multiple grams in just like a scoop of coffee difference. So
because of the different density in the coffees.
Yep. Exactly.
So I guess, do we have any tips for people, like as you scales are out there pretty commonly now, but like any tips, Simon, that you have for like how to set it up properly or how to use scales well?
Yeah, just measuring, knowing what you want to measure, knowing what are the different metrics that you're trying to replicate. So that's usually the dose and the amount of water that you're using. In espresso machines, obviously, we don't really measure the amount of water that we use, but we measure the yield. So the amount of espresso that's coming out. And these are the two main metrics. You can also measure the contact time as well, but these would be the metrics that you would be measuring.
Well, what about as well, some of the new grinders are also getting flow rates. Would you apply that more to filter coffee, espresso, both? Do you use that much?
You mean flow rates for grinders or machines?
For machines, for the extraction.
Espresso machines. Yeah. So that's a very interesting one. So pressure profiling, flow rates on machines, I'm not too big on these variables because, and that's usually the framework that I use to assess any innovation. Is it really impactful? Does it make coffee better? Is it replicable? And is it predictable? Can you predict the outcome if you lower the bar pressure? Can you predict the outcome if you lower the flow rates? And I find that with these two, it's not necessarily extremely predictable and it's not always, consistency can be fine, but it's not always making coffee taste better. So it seems like a lot of work for very little return in my views.
Is that different? I'm talking about like on the scales where it's telling you like how many grams per second you're getting as you extract. Is that what it's like measuring or... Do you know what I'm talking about?
On the scale itself, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I thought you were talking about the machine.
No.
The machine, yeah.
I'm probably using the wrong terminology because I'm stupid, but you know.
You could, I guess you could.
Because I don't ever use
the overall time for me would be way more, the overall time of extraction would be way more important than did it pour really fast at the beginning and slow down afterwards. It's not really how it works. It usually works the other way around. But again, like you got to think about it in terms of what's really important and what's secondary. So what's the 20% of variables that make up for 80% of the cup? And then what's the 20% of variables? What's the 80% of those tiny tiny variables that don't really impact coffee that will just like make the last couple percentages? And I think that one is kind of like, it's maybe the cherry on top of the cake, but I wouldn't really worry about this one.
Yep. The top two tips that I've got for people with using their scales is one is calibration. Don't forget to calibrate your scales because vibration, movement, temperature, the age of the scales, all these things can actually affect the accuracy of the readout. So if you're relying on the number, but you don't have a calibration weight, it can be a problem.
And just jump on Amazon. They're like a couple bucks. You just get a little set.
Yep.
Easy peasy. Or some come with it.
And then the second thing is just be careful of heat on your scales because a lot of people are brewing directly onto their scales and a scale has a load cell, a little metal flange that flexes, the flange flexes, looking you in the eyes as I say that.
Say it again.
The flange flexes, but it will flex differently depending on if it's got a lot of heat around it. Yeah, it's a piece of metal. It has more flexibility when it gets...
so how does that work though if you're like, are you saying that as you brew like a hot coffee on it, it might change the... But then how do you do it? How do you change it?
Heat mats or some kind of...
the little rubber things. Is that why they have those?
Mat and things in between, especially for filter coffee. Because you're
thought
putting
they were for
hot
just
The
liquid...
decanter is right on top. Yeah. I guess some of the most commonly found scales for coffee would probably either come with a rubber that would separate them.
Rubber for protection?
Yeah, usually. Exactly.
Yep.
Sorry, everyone.
What? Isn't that what we're saying?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I've always wondered why this rubber was for, but
Let's move on to our next thing here.
It's getting a little chilly in here. I think it's time for freeze distilled milk with 2 sugars. Let's talk about
a whole new section.
freeze distilled milk. Now, Freeze distilled milk is a really interesting one because I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, World Barista Champions started to freeze distilled milk to kind of get around a rule where they couldn't use cream when they were brewing, but they could alter just regular dairy milk. So they found that if you froze dairy milk and defrosted it, the fat would melt quicker and come out, and you'd leave some of the water behind. So you were left with a more creamy concentrate to make the drink more rich. But the interesting thing outside of competitions, you can still do it, but it was kind of a hack to get around a rule, really. Whereas at home, just add a bit of cream if you want.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and I think just one thing that we need to mention in general is all of these innovations might sound like trivial to some people. Like some people might be thinking, why would you bother freeze distilling milk when you can buy cream? Because that's that would be the smartest, easiest thing to do. But you got to keep in mind that in coffee competitions, if you win a coffee competition, you might that might come with dollar incentives or fame and like potentially power in some cases. So people are really eager to win those competitions, and a lot of the time people are on equal foot. Like people source the same coffees, they have the same techniques, and you need that innovation in order to find the next little hack that will help you gain those little extra percentages. And if you were back then the first person to do freeze distilled milk, you would crush the competition because your milk, your flat white, your cappuccino you're serving would have been substantially sweeter and creamier. It would have been hard to beat, I think.
Well, when you're competing for those 1 and 2 positions, right, it can come down to that 1 point or that one extra thing. We saw it the last year with Jack and Mikhail kind of thing where it's like it comes down to just that little tiny thing. So yeah, that would have made a big difference. Is there anything else? For people at home, that freeze distilled milk would be super easy to try.
Yeah, it's a pretty easy technique to do. And can you talk us through how would you do freeze distilled milk?
I actually have never done it myself because I'm not a big milk drinker, but the idea of it is you would freeze a whole bottle of milk, and as soon as everything is solidified, you would basically put a bottle of milk into the fridge, put it upside down, and the water will basically... So you'll have water in that milk, and then you'll have the rest of the milk that's solidified. The water will the ice will become water faster than the rest of the milk, and you'll basically be able to separate the water from the milk and be left with only the milk itself. So you'll basically be getting rid of the water contents in your milk.
Yeah. And so you can, pairing this with our last conversation about the scales, is that you generally want to weigh how much milk did you start with and then how much did you come out to get a bit of a gauge of how much you distilled your milk, right? Is it 40% distilled? And you're going to end up with, as you said, a richer, thicker, higher fat content. And when you go and steam that milk, it's going to be very sweet, very kind of heavy bodied. It's a fun kind of exercise to do, and you can make exceptional coffees. Kind of pairing with it. It's very luxurious, so it's a nice thing to do.
Now we'll jump around a bit here, but just because we're talking about freeze distilled milk, that was kind of a thing that became big in the past. I would say the current thing that feels really big is milk blending, right? Where have we seen, do you guys have some examples of where we've seen milk blending in the past few years?
The first time I personally heard of milk blending was through competitions when a couple of years ago, full cream wasn't the only milk that you could use. They opened up the regulation to non-dairy milks to be used, basically, just to make the competition a bit more inclusive.
Oh, just for clarity on that. So at a certain point, it was only dairy milk that could be used. Were you allowed lactose, skinny, whatever, or was it just full cream milk?
It was just full cream milk. Yep.
And when did that run up to?
2023, I believe was the first year.
Super recently.
Or that we could, 2022, 2023 were the first year.
Yep.
I knew it was recently. I didn't know.
Quite recently.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And as soon as that was an option, people started messing around with, what if I try my coffee with coconut milk, or I try with almond milk, and then they realized, well, almond has a really nice texture, but then I like the flavors of dairy milk better, but then oat has a really nice sweetness, and what if I combine all these three? And
the ones I've seen was like, this was only dairy, but I saw Anthony Douglas did lactose and dairy. That was because with lactose milk, we perceive more sweetness, but then to still get that creaminess, it was mixed with full cream.
Lactose-free?
Lactose-free, yeah. Yep. Sorry, lactose-free, because of the lactate something glyco little blah, 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 gives you more perceived sweetness. And then the dairy is going to give you that richness. Then we've seen Jack Simpson at Australia this year did dairy milk with like a powdered oat milk or like a distilled oat milk kind of thing. So I've been able to try that, and it's like ice cream. It's like sweet, it's creamy, it's thick, it's like more viscous. I just want to say viscous. And Mikhail, who won? I can't remember exactly, but it was like cashew.
Yeah, cashew, because it's got this like nice fat content. It's very creamy, very round. Yeah.
I'm going to go
Coconut,
off, but it was
maybe?
like cashew, macadamia, and oat or something like that.
Yeah. So people are really exploring what kinds of combinations of milk can work really well in the milk round of the competition, right? Which we know as well can be quite a range of sizes. So it used to be that this was a cappuccino. So it was a 5 to 6 ounce kind of drink and single shot of espresso and a certain amount of milk. And now it's just a milk beverage. So it can be small and higher ratios of milk to espresso or more milky. The thing that I like about this innovation space is it's really putting a focus on fine-tuning a milk coffee experience, which is the majority of the world's coffee consumption.
Yeah, I mean, we see it in Australia and Sydney and Melbourne, where in some cafes in Sydney, you've got over 50% of consumers that drink oat milk. Like in some places in Sydney, there's more consumers drinking oat milk than full cream. So the fact that it's been adapting based on what the market looks like, I think is awesome. And I don't know many cafes right now that do milk blending, but again, we've seen this come into competition like 2-3 years ago, and it usually takes a while for that to trickle down into cafes. But going back to freeze distilled milk, there's now I know maybe like 20 cafes in Australia that serve freeze distilled milk as an option.
Oh, really?
Not as a base, because that'd be a lot of milk to freeze distill. Like the logistics of it it's not easy, but they have that as an option for more high-end coffees. And
Why would they not just blend it with a bit of dairy with a bit of cream?
that is probably the easier way to
Is
do
it just to sound like
I'm not
fancy?
too sure
Is that why? Because
I'm not too sure on that one, to be honest. Like you should be able to find there's probably other ways to make that easier. And that's, I think, sometimes the reason why there's a gap between what you see in competition and what you see in the real world, because some of those things are not necessarily practical. But if you find something like some way around that, like for example, blending maybe cream with milk itself, and maybe that would be a way easier way to do.
I've seen some of the competitors use like Riverina Fresh have like their gold, which is like higher fat content than regular. So it goes there. I mean, do we have some of the best dairy? Because I've even seen some competitors flying like this Riverina Fresh over to Dubai and stuff. Like I think when the team went over to Dubai, we had to like load up some milk in suitcases and stuff to get it.
I've heard that a couple of times. I mean, even Jack Simpson going to Italy for the World Championship, I'm pretty sure he's flying with his own milk.
Yeah.
Little milk bottles just flying around the world. I think, there's two aspects to the milk blending. One is like it's fun to go and experiment with that and, break our preconceptions that, just full cream. I only drink full cream milk, or I only drink alternative milks. But maybe kind of going, I've got some more flavors and sensory things of like toasty, nutty characteristics, or even a little bit of that saltiness that can come out from some kind of milks, creating something that will be a new exploration. But I'm also interested with the blending where it might help enable some of the specialty coffee markets around the world who don't have access to great dairy. Like have you heard of third wave water? Mm-hmm. It's kind of the sachets, right, of like minerals that you can add in. I'm sure you've heard of this. Have you heard of this water additive thing?
Never heard of them.
Yeah. But what if it was something like that for milk, where there was a powdered
milk,
specific formulated, great for coffee kind of milk sachet? Because a lot of places struggle with doing great quality milk because it's all UHT kind of Tetra Paks.
I mean, even in most European capitals, you'll struggle to find fresh milk in cafes just because it's not very common for people to consume fresh milk. Mm-hmm. It's usually UHT that people consume. But usually you'll find, you won't find a lot of like fresh milk even in like European cities for cafes.
It was interesting because a lot of the alternative milks will have different oils in them to help give the texture of like a full cream or whatever. But I did a video a while ago about putting olive oil in coffee, and it was like done as an April Fool's joke, but then we're like, actually, this is pretty good. And I can't remember where it was from, but I got a bunch of messages from people who were using like a powdered milk. and they were adding olive oil, like try the
Oh,
thing
wow.
that I did. And they were like, you have no idea how much better it's made this like powdered milk that we've been using. It's like so silky and it textures better and it like blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, that's quite a funny, didn't mean for that to happen, but cool takeaway.
Innovation on the Rowan stage. That's
Yeah.
what we
Maybe we'll sit in Milan in a couple of.
Starbucks have already done it and killed it. So never mind.
just there.
And yeah, I guess for anyone at home, just get some different milks and give it a go. I guess a cool thing as well is, I mean, I know some people have issues with, some people are actually reverting back to dairy because of the oils and that are in alternative milks. But this is probably a cool opportunity where you could mix dairy and alternative cashew, this, that. Like obviously Jack's oat and dairy is a good place to start. Give that a go. His is different because he's using like a freeze-dried oat milk or something, but I'm sure you could just whack a bit of oat milk in and see how you go.
So that's an interesting point. So Jack is using freeze-dried milk. So he gets his milk, freeze-dries it, and then it ends up like it looks like a powder, and then he reintroduces that powder into the milk that he's using. So it's like concentrating milk similar to what freeze distilled would be, and it adds a lot of sweetness and everything. And that's like, for example, an innovation that came from coffee competitions.
Yep.
We don't necessarily see that in cafes yet, but as you mentioned, that could be something that we'll see in cafes or at home in a couple of years under the form of sachets that you can then add on to your existing milk or dilute it with water or whatever and have something that is, tasting better than what you currently have. So it's interesting to see that. I don't even know how they came across this, but I mean, again, like trying to push the boundaries of, okay, we need to make this milk sweeter. We need to make this cappuccino taste rounder, creamier. What are techniques that we can look at? And I think it's pretty cool to see this. And maybe in 5-6 years, we'll see that trickle down.
I think you'd have to if it's accessible and easy enough to do, because I've tasted some of these milks and you're like, it's
ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's like a dessert. You're like, this is insane, especially if you're looking at like smaller drinks like a cortado or like these kind of things. Like, oh my God, it's so good.
I don't know if I would want to drink a 16-ounce cup of this because it's very sweet, it's very creamy. But like as a piccolo cortado, sort of like very small beverage, it's like a dessert more than a milk-based coffee. But it's outrageously good. Huh?
Although I think we did, saying that, we heard some little inside scoop that might be in an upcoming podcast that Mr. Lance Hendrick really loves cryo distilled milk.
Oh,
little
yeah.
of that.
Little sippy cups. He just
listen
has
into that.
That's coming up. Yeah. Now, when I was a little baby barista, crying into my baby chino, I'm quoting you here. When I was a baby barista, I would walk into a cafe and want to see a La Marzocco logo. That was how I was like, oh, that's a cool cafe. Then, as specialty started to take off, it changed. It was no longer the La Marzocco, still good, but it'd be behind the La Marzocco on the back bar. Was there an EK? Was there an EK 43 grinder? Now, who introduced, was it Pergs?
Matt Perger.
Matt Perger. He was the first one to bring it into that competition stage. And now every single cafe, even if they don't need it, has one on the back bench just so they can say we're specialty.
I would say this is a very warm take, but I would say most cafes don't need an EK.
No.
Most cafes that have an EK don't need an EK behind the bench. But they have it because of that social status. And when I travel overseas, that is literally the one thing that I look for. I know if there's a cafe that has an EK, that probably means they have retail. That probably means they take coffee seriously. Therefore, I'm more likely to walk in. But it's a very good point.
And so I don't know too much about the background of this one, but let me just throw out so before Matt did this, was everyone just using kind of like hopper-based grinders and doing that? So is this kind of the introduction of where single dosing came from?
Yeah, essentially. And it was, I believe it was the 2013 World Barista Championships, which was the last time it was held in Australia. And Matt was competing for Australia and announced, utilized the EK in his performance. And I think, yes, it was the introduction and the real drive on single dose grinding. And then it was also the start of like a hyper focus towards grind particle distribution.
Yeah.
So looking at exactly the kinds and the shape and the makeup of the grind spread that you get out of a grinder.
So from fines to boulders and trying to find
Everything in between.
Trying to understand why different grind setting. I mean, because you can use 5 different grinders, have espresso pull at 30 seconds, and then have the exact same recipe, but have 5 completely different taste experiences because of those particle distributions that you just mentioned, so or particle shapes as well. So I think that was the first time that someone really kind of introduced this idea of, okay, different grinders will give us different shapes and different spreads, and the EK was introduced that way.
Now, Is there from a home level, we'll go into this more, but just as you said that, I found it interesting. I feel like now everyone, it's just like online wants to be like, you have to single dose. Even like people are single dosing into their like Breville Barista Express with the built-in grinder. I'm like, I don't know if that crappy grinder of single dosing is the best idea to like dump it in the top there. I think have some beans in there and let it bring down some gravity to like help do the work.
That's an interesting one. We've seen more recently in competition people trying to also do this like drop feeding of beans into a grinder. So have any domestic grinder and then just putting beans one by one. So you have a different
speed.
you have a different speed and it grinds coffee differently. Like you have a different particle shape, particle size. And there's claims of this being like tasting better. I don't have enough, I guess, empirical data to make a decision on that, but just from an anecdotal point of view, I've had great cups made this way. But again, is this so? Sure, it makes coffee a little bit better, but is this convenient to implement? And in a cafe, that's never going to happen. At home, potentially, if you have 20 minutes to make coffee in the morning, and does it really justify? I mean, can you justify spending that much extra time just to make your coffee a tiny bit better?
Then just to dump it in a nice latte with vanilla anyway.
yeah. Well, I think it's interesting, and you make a good point, Simon. I think that like, what are we trying to achieve with these things, and is it likely to work in what is quite a dynamic environment? Like coffee making, especially espresso, is very dynamic. Like if you think about just that process of grinding coffee, let alone extraction, you've got coffee moving through vertically or diagonally, or depending on where the burrs are set up, through like a spinning set of burrs that are shaped differently. All of the beans have got a little bit of variation. There's different weight on top, and it's like pressuring or not that feeding through. And it's all affecting how the coffee is ground. But like our ability to control and replicate, like you said, like the biggest question about single dose feeding like that is about the weight on top. And there's the conversation around the popcorn effect, where the beans hit spinning burrs and just get flung back out, right? And you'll see them bounce a little bit if you've got not many coffee beans in the hopper, and that's affecting how the coffee is being cut by those.
Different
burrs.
every time you grind it. You can't control all those variables. I mean, we're bringing in like pre-breakers and the augers and stuff that are trying to like feed in more broken particles.
And I think that's where, like, if the grinder is built with low doses in mind, then it's going to have things like augers and ways to kind of cleanly feed small doses through. But maybe for some of those home machines or more traditional kind of like Mazza Robers and stuff, it doesn't have quite the same setup.
And for those listening at home, can you give us a little more detail on like the auger pre-breaker kind of thing going on?
Yeah, well, the auger is basically just a little spiral that is like physically drawing the beans down and kind of almost positioning them right on top of the burrs.
More evenly feed it in, so it's not just flying in and smashing into burrs kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right.
The pre-breaking I haven't seen a huge amount of, to be honest.
Is this idea, I'm not completely covered on it, but I feel like they're trying to like say if we can like kind of break the beans into smaller bits, it's then going to grind more uniformly once it gets introduced.
That's the idea of double grinding. I mean, some people do that in competitions again. I mean, double grinding your coffee it takes way more time, obviously. It's more effort, but if you can have better results and if that's replicable and that's consistent, then you might see some value in that. But I think just to go back on just the broader idea of innovating to improve coffee, I think, again, all of these things need to make coffee taste better. And to me, it needs to make coffee taste better in a way that's noticeable, because otherwise it sounds like a lot of extra work to have very little return. So it's always this balance of like, how much extra work or extra equipment do I need? And then what's the return on that? Or are there other ways that I can improve my coffee before I implement these things?
Yeah. Can I improve my coffee by 10% by just looking at something simple over here rather than 1% by doing this long
and we see that, I mean, we see these things in competitions because you got to keep in mind that the people who compete, they are fighting. I mean, like you said, sometimes the outcome, the first place, second place come down to 1 point.
Yep.
And these people control literally everything down to the amount of hours the coffee was roasted. Like it's not 17 hours, it's 18 hours after roast. Like they literally control everything. I mean, I've competed and coached people where we sort beans literally one by one, like with a magnifying glass, and we go through the shape, size, color of every single bean one by one. And we've done it with Nemo, preparing for the AeroPress Championship.
Just to make them as uniform as possible?
Just make sure that we have everything that we want. Like each bean tastes different. And then obviously depending on the size and shape, some will be a bit more floral, some will be a bit more fruity. So if we want to make sure that everything is perfect, like we would select beans one by one. And that's like you don't want to be doing that.
Yeah.
He didn't want to be doing that. He didn't want to be doing that.
I've got a good idea as a social experiment. Maybe our Liam AeroPress Championship run that we're going to put him on, maybe we need to bring in Simon as a second part. If you're talking about like looking at using APAX Labs or Waved or all these different things to get it better, what better way to prove it than getting Liam?
We'll do a one-on-one, yeah.
Get Liam to win the AeroPress Championship. Because that was like what I was talking.
First. Nemo's taking the trophy.
Yeah, that's this year, and then next year,
yeah.
We can have a whole docu-series on taking someone who's never, barely made AeroPress before and get them to win.
Yeah, but again, all of these things for me, they make sense if you've got your bases covered. If the coffee that you're using is spot on, if you understand what you're doing with your recipe, if the water that you have is great. I mean, if you're using like Sydney tap water or Brisbane tap water, looking at all of these other variables for me make no sense because your basis is already wrong. Like you don't have the fundamentals covered. It really reminds me of food science, where everybody seems to disagree when it comes to food science. And I remember I keep hearing this idea of you need to take your intake of protein needs to be spread out throughout the day. Like you can't take all of your protein in one meal, for example. It needs to be spread out throughout the day. And it looks like this is the one thing that you would do if you're an elite athlete and you're competing in the world championship. But for people like us, it doesn't make any difference. And there's a lot of stuff like that in coffee where there are things that people do in the world championship that will give them the extra 0.1 percentage. But
I think the introduction of the EK43, maybe it as a grinder isn't the be all and end all in terms of the flow on, but it was a significant moment of innovation, I think, in the coffee world, because some of the conversations it sparked, even if the particular technology, the conversations and the focus it sparked in what kind of burrs you're using and in
I was going to say,
dose.
Was that also the flat burr versus conical burr kind of argument starting there, which, if you look at any forum now, it's like anyone who's buying like any grinder that releases a hopper grinder is just like abused in the comments. Like, how outdated are you? You don't even understand. They're like 90% of people just want to dump a bag and make their coffee. Like, leave us alone.
And I think for folks who, want to kind of check this out, if you're at home or in a cafe, this might just be the case of kind of tasting. You could do little experiments to taste side by side when your extractions are single dosed or not. Does it make any difference? Can you taste it blind, right? As Simon's saying.
I think that's the best thing that you can do. And I used to do that as a barista when I was working in cafes. In the afternoon, the cafe would get pretty quiet, like from 2-3 p.m. And we would pick a topic every single day, do a blind tasting, see if we could predict that variable, replicate that variable. And by doing that over and over again, this is how you build this massive repertoire of dynamics between different variables. And you can see which ones are impactful, which ones are not so impactful. And then you can make your decisions based on, okay, this is really important. I cannot compromise on this. And this is like, well, I can't really tell the difference. I can't really triangulate the cups. They all taste the same to me. I don't really need to worry about this variable. Like, I think this is the best way that you can make your own decision about what's real and what's not, because there's a lot of noise out there. Like every time you open Instagram, there's something new. There's a new tool, there's a new grinder, there's a new brewer, and you need to decipher between all of that.
And I think that has been one of the great things and why the competitions are such a powerful innovation space, is because people are trying all these things, but then the success of it is gauged on, did it actually have an impact in the cup? It's like the judges are going, well, what's the outcome you're actually trying to achieve? Even if we talk about, and we'll talk a little bit about dosing techniques, but did you actually achieve a better, more uniform kind of distribution in the basket? Not just did you say you were doing something and it looked fancy. I think one other area of innovation that's been really interesting in the coffee world has been about the freezing of roasted coffee beans. And it kind of started, the outcome now in the industry, but where it started are a little bit different, because from my understanding, the freezing of roasted coffee beans actually was linked to this idea of grinding and grind particle distribution.
I'm going to pull you up there.
Yeah.
I think this is wrong. Freezing coffee did not begin at competitions. It began with your grandma chucking some dark roast beans in the freezer to
Bought
keep
a couple
them
of
fresh.
kilos
So
on special down
let's
at
not
the
give
grocery
this down
store.
to the World Barista Championships. But yes,
It
you're
was
right.
grandmas around the world who
There's-
innovated this.
Yeah. There's actually been a few things about the grinding, right? Both hot and cold affecting. I know I've seen Proud Mary have, is it eat in a freezer? Like he's drilled out freezers and the hoppers are up there so that the beans are at a certain temperature when grinding. Why do they do this?
To make sure that the beans are always at a specific temperature, which would be negative. And this would have a major impact on the way coffee beans shatter in the grinding process. So you generally have less fine particles, which will lead to less bitterness, more clarity,
sweetness.
not necessarily
No?
more sweetness.
Okay.
And that's the thing with particle size distribution. That's one of the reasons why I tend to, just take a bit of distance with grinding, because you can have a look at what a chart looks like in terms of particle spread, and the experience in the cup might be very different from what you would expect. And that's not necessarily something that I think is extremely predictable. So sometimes you can have more sweetness, sometimes you might not have more sweetness. The fines might bring a lot of sweetness, and sometimes they might also bring other things. But yeah, the idea is they keep the coffee cold so that it shatters in a more uniform way. You definitely get more clarity. And I also think it looks very cool in a cafe. Like, is it needed in a cafe? Probably not. But, I think it looks really cool.
Yeah,
and
it's a good story for sure.
Even beyond whether freezing it is going to make it grind differently, I do like the idea that it gives you a consistency, because I know when I was working in a cafe, if you'd come in winter or in summer, it would be completely different. The coffees would completely change. If you can keep the beans at a consistent temperature, I'm sure that helps with
and
variance.
also like when your roast is at 7 days versus 14 days, like the coffee's changed. And then at least if it's frozen, like from 1 week to another, the change is going to be extremely minimal. So it allows you to be more consistent in that way. And that kind of goes back to the use of the EK. When the EK was introduced, we started having more single dosed coffees, which means that cafes could finally have a coffee menu, and they didn't need to have like 4 grinders to have 4 coffees on the menu. And that's when we started cafes having more coffee options than milk options. So you could have all of a sudden like 20 coffees on the menu, 30 coffees on the menu, even more, especially when you get to freeze these coffees, because you get to have like 50 coffees, and then you don't need to sell all of them in the same week. You can sell them in 6 months.
I also like it from a home barista standpoint, because sometimes you go into a cafe and there's like the, $60 bag of, 100 grams of whatever really fancy coffee. And you're like, oh, that's expensive. But then you're like, do I have to brew this every day? And then it goes bad quickly, and then it does this. But buying that $60 bag of coffee, putting it into like those little test tubes, making sure there's as little oxygen in it as possible, and freezing them, then all of a sudden, if you're like, oh, I can have that once every month for the next year, or when friends come over, all of a sudden that $60 is like, well, over a year, that's not bad.
Yep. And the interesting thing with those innovation, and when you look at what freezing beans in general, that came from competition, and around the 2016 to 2019 era, most people were freezing their coffee, and it was really trendy, and it was sort of like a widely accepted technique. And now you barely see that anymore. And it's very interesting to understand why it's kind of disappeared from that meta game. Was this a fad, or was this real? And I think that in this instance, what happened is we were trying to solve a problem by freezing coffee. We were able to solve that problem, and then we realized there are other ways that we can solve that problem, potentially like better grinders, different bird geometry to have more clarity. Therefore, I don't need to freeze my coffee anymore in order to have this better particle distribution, or things like being able to roast in a different way to have coffee peak a little faster or last longer in time, so that you don't have to rush through that bag of coffee. These are all techniques that people have used in order to replace freezing. But
the bird geometry one is like insane. Imagine being like, well, the lines are going at this angle, and what's the one everyone's going on? The SPs, is that what was
SSP.
big? SSPs for a while, and
and I think that's the thing that I always find very. I'm a pretty skeptical person by nature. I think we're all really skeptical.
Je suis fatigué.
Oui.
Je déteste la poisson.
I usually, when I see things like that online, I'm usually extremely skeptical, and I like to make my own opinion. And I like doing those blind tasting. And I've had multiple instances where I try SSP burrs versus, which are like, I guess, the go-to sort of premium option versus a bunch of other options. And every single time I've picked the non-SSP burrs. And again, it might be because of a combination of different factors and a combination of different variables that were put together. But it didn't mean that every single time I tried the SSP, it was better. Like I think that's the thing that people need to disconnect from.
So if people wanting to have a play around in this innovation space with freezing coffee, I think kind of the key takeaways, you buy the coffee, you want to freeze it fairly fresh, and then you want to, as Rowan was saying, portion it out so that you're only utilizing the amount that you take out of the freezer versus kind of taking a whole bag out, use a bit, put it back in the freezer. You don't want to be doing that.
Well, that's something I didn't know, the freshness thing. So when you're freezing, what is kind of like the ideal after roast days that you'd want to be getting, like pretty much as soon as possible?
It depends on when you want to consume that coffee. So if you want to consume that coffee in 3 years, you need to freeze it as soon as possible. But if you want to consume it in 2-3 months, you can wait a little bit more. Because let's say if your freshly roasted coffee peaks at 3 weeks, if you're freezing your coffee at 1 day or 2 days, in 3 months, it's still going to be too fresh. And the rule of thumb with freezing, like room temperature versus frozen, is usually you slow down the aging by 16. So it ages 16 times slower. So what would be 1 month at room temperature? 16 months at room temperature would be 1 month in the freezer, like as a rule of thumb. So it really depends. If you really want to be drinking that coffee in 2-3 years, freeze as soon as possible, I would say.
And do you grind it just frozen straight out of the freezer, or do you like let it come to temperature? About can of worms? Was that the look that I'm getting?
I mean, yeah, the idea of freezing coffee in the first place was to have a better particle distribution. So the idea is you don't thaw the coffee or you try to grind as quickly as possible. So literally you get your dose out of the freezer, you grind the coffee, you have a better particle size distribution. I've done those blind tastings and I've had better results thawing the coffee. So
there you go.
Yeah.
And again,
you just got to be a little careful of like the condensation and moisture as you thaw things. So if there's less oxygen in there, you're not going to get water around the beans, which can cause problems if you're doing that a lot through a grinder.
So if you do thaw it, you need to make sure that it's kept in the container. Don't allow oxygen into it. Because I know I saw like if you were doing like a whole kilo of coffee, put a sticker over the valve, chuck it in the freezer, take it out the night before you're going to use it and leave it on the bench, and don't let any air be introduced. Otherwise it'll get moist and...
Yep. That's the good tips, I think. And I think it is worth playing around with, though, just from portioning, because it does allow you to, if you're at home, you can buy like a whole range of different beans when they're available, but then portion them out so they're not going stale. You get the best out of them for, when you have a spread. And the same in the cafe. It could be a really valuable thing to check out and see, does it allow you to open up your coffee menu?
And I think just for folks who are listening to this and who are making coffee at home, I think the thing that I see very frequently with home baristas, home brewers, is that people tend to think that their coffee go off faster than it actually does. And I think that most of the coffees that I drink at home are honestly like 2, 3, 4 months old. And they sometimes taste way better at 3 months than they tasted at 3 weeks. And the peak for freshness isn't always, you don't always have this like 2 to 4 week window freshness. Like it really depends on the coffee. It really depends on how it's roasted. And my advice would be explore windows that you wouldn't necessarily think of. And just to give an anecdote, in the last competition I did, my coffee was 6 or 7 weeks old, which would be considered way too old for the way it was roasted and everything. And I know for a fact that coffee was even better at 3 months old. So it's interesting to, again, like think outside the box and see if, get better results in doing things in other ways.
Taste it. Just check it out.
All right. Should we talk? Well, I was going to talk processing methods. I feel like you guys, Ben, as a judge of the World Barista Championships, I'm sure you've seen it go from just classic, washed and naturals now to carbonic macerations and anaerobic. And now can you even have co-fermented coffees in competitions? Is that then allowed in?
Went back on that decision.
They went back.
Yeah. So it was allowed for a couple of years and now not really allowed anymore.
No.
But it's one of those things it's kind of challenging to test whether it's co-fermented or infused.
I'm just Liam laughing at me going, no. I just see him in my periffs. Okay, but processing, but then also like where the varieties as well, right, is probably a good thing to tap into.
Yeah, well, I think, again, people are trying to get an edge, and the competitions, whether it be Brewers Cup or Barista Championships, is, incredibly focused on what is in the cup, the sensory profile. And so processing has a huge impact on that. And we have seen over the years that the search for flavor and for sensory attributes has really driven, where people are sourcing. And in turn, that's kind of caused innovation at a processing level, certainly, and at a varietal kind of like discussion level. But processing, we've certainly seen, we've seen broad movements in processing, I think, that have been somewhat influenced by competition. But the caveat I would say is this is always a very niche thing. So if we think about innovation happening in the competition stage and it trickling down to cafe levels, that flows are like a little bit more established and faster.
Yeah, but it's quite quick, I think.
But the idea of like competition level innovation happening and then flowing down to the producer and the farm level, it is happening, but it's very niche. And I think that's probably a good thing that it's niche, because there's some people, the risk and the investment to try something out on one cappuccino versus another cappuccino is way smaller than like, I'm going to rip up all of my coffee variety and invest tens of thousands of dollars in planting new things, and then it doesn't work. Oh, that's a bad innovation investment.
Well, we've even seen some of it's like bringing back certain species from extinction almost, like because that's where I feel like some competitors are trying to get an edge, where it's like, what's a coffee? Because sometimes
Did you know this?
Yeah, like that kind of thing. And I feel like, geisha was obviously, I feel like competitions that was brought to light from, but now I've just had so many geishas that sometimes I'm like, just give me something different. I just want something that's like unexpected,
That's I think the cool thing about competitions. Like geisha was discovered or rediscovered in coffee competitions. Hacienda La Esmeralda in One Best of Panama, when they reintroduced geisha. And I believe it was Matt Pugger in 2011 or 2012 in the World Brewers Cup Championship who was the first competitor to ever bring a geisha to a competition, and no one had ever really tried geishas back then. So won the whole competition, and that was like a massive innovation. So it's right. Like we didn't really touch on innovation that happens at the farm level. Like we've touched on different tools and different techniques, but definitely I think the bulk of the innovation that we've seen in coffee competition comes from the farm level. And the reason for that is because that's usually the most impactful way to make better coffee. If you think about, if you want to make better coffee, if you have better ingredients, like that's how you're going to make better coffee. If you think about cooking, just source better ingredients and you'll make better food. Having a different knife, I don't think it's going to make a huge difference. Whereas like having better ingredients would make a huge difference. And it comes to what coffees you're sourcing, what water you're using. They're your two ingredients. So,
well, the knife might help at that, as you said, the 1%.
90%.
But if you got a crap tomato, the knife isn't going to make that bad tomato taste better.
Exactly. And if you have a blunt knife, you can have an amazing tomato, and it's going to be difficult to get something. If you use a butter knife for an amazing heirloom tomato, it might be challenging, but you'll still have the great raw product. Exactly. So a lot of the innovation, has been mentioned, has trickled down into cafes, and it's awesome to see like cafes adopting world championship coffees. So coffees taste like amazing, like good enough to be on the world stage, and they adapt that very quickly. But it takes a while to trickle back onto the producer level, and which can be a good thing, can be a bad thing as well. Like we've seen cases of producers also wanting to have a competitive edge and to sell their product and jumping on the train of fermentation or new techniques a little bit too quickly, and then have to pay the price for some of those.
And I think
mistakes.
This is a good kind of reminder as we talk about innovation, is that huge portion of innovation is the failure of ideas. The innovation is stepping into the unknown or trying something new. And as you do that, you're going to find that that there are a lot of those ideas that don't work. And so you have to be conscious of the cost.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that we don't talk about the failures as much as the successes. Like for, I think, every new great batch with a specific new fermentation technique, there's probably 100, if not 1,000 batches that failed and coffees that were defective, like some of the worst coffees you've tried, and before you could make the most amazing coffee. So we don't really talk about those things yet.
Yeah. So I guess just to recap on processing methods innovation there is that we have seen in the pursuit of different flavors, and specifically for the competition, it's about putting forward descriptors that are very identifiable and very clear and have a lot of clarity. So it's in search of that, which is really exciting, that producers and processors have looked at different fermentation techniques, specifically around like carbonic maceration, different anaerobic styles of fermenting.
Yeah, using different strains of yeast and bacteria as well. Like, I mean, now we start to see producers like identifying different types of yeast that they find in the wild on their farm, and then cultivating those yeast and then re-inoculating the cherries with those yeast and making coffees that are just like out of this world. So that's, I think, true innovation.
And the exciting thing is that you can find these out on a lot of cafe menus now around the world, and it really has jumped, very quickly, I think, into the general consumption. So if you haven't tried any of those kinds of coffees before, they're a pretty fascinating taste experience. Not to everyone's liking, but go out and check out some of those experimental processing.
You know what we don't see enough, because the price, for whatever reason, with milk-based coffees, people are like, well, it's not as pure and I don't want to spend the money because I'm not getting the exact thing. But man, some of these coffees, when you have them as a milk-based drink, is the most transformative thing that can blow your mind. But we don't see it because it's not how it's being represented, or it'll cost too much. But man, you can have some like super boozy, dark cherry, rich chocolate things that taste like a dessert. And even the texture in your mouth is just like so thick and insane. I'd love to see more of that out there, and like these cool, amazing processing methods being used for milk-based drinks.
They're generally too overwhelming to be drunk as black coffee or as just like a filter espresso. And usually when paired with milk, they're absolutely phenomenal.
So next innovation that we've seen out there is definitely, we can talk about it in broadly about how the coffee is distributed into the basket, right? And this is like the Weiss distribution technique is probably the most well-known kind of implementation of that. Simon, can you talk us through, if anyone hasn't heard of ET or the Weiss distribution technique, what's the background to that?
I'm not too sure about the genesis of it, but the idea of it is using needles in order to move coffee around in the basket to have the most uniform distribution that you can have. Like, you're basically randomizing coffee particles, but you're also breaking clumps that you can have from the grinding process, especially if you're grinding on a finer grind setting, especially if there's humidity, you can have some clumps in your coffee. Breaking those clumps down is extremely important to have an even flow and even extraction when you're extracting your coffee afterwards.
The funny thing with this one is I feel like this has been one of the biggest, especially as someone who makes coffee for the home market. This has trickled down into the home market. Now you see just like every random person with a Breville Barista Express using this. WDTing might actually be better for the home market than it is for the competition level, because you're using such good grinders where the particles are so fluffy and amazing. Whereas when you're grinding through like a lower level grinder, that's when you get those boulders and clumping, and the WDT really does help there.
That's a really good point. And it ticks all of the boxes of, is this impactful? Yes, it makes substantially better coffee. Is this predictable? Yeah, you can always taste better extraction with this. And is this replicable? And it ticks all of these boxes. And it's also fairly affordable as well. So easy to implement at home. It's funny because I think more people use it at home than in cafes.
Yeah.
You see more home users using it at home than baristas use that behind the bar.
Because they have time.
They have time, but also you've got a good point with the idea of some grinders don't necessarily, the grind distribution, the grind quality is so good that you don't necessarily need that.
The gains aren't as big.
Exactly. Like you'll probably gain 1 or 2%, whereas at home with a worse grinder, you'll gain like 10, 20%. So you're right. And then if you're behind the bar and you're pumping and you're super busy, you have to pick your battles. Like, you can't try and get every single percentages. So I'm happy to lose 2% in the cup if that saves me 20 seconds each coffee.
I think the tools as well haven't been super user friendly for a busy environment. Like if you think about like a little handheld needle and you're doing this and you've got like a docket run of like a couple of hundred coffees.
And that's where the auto comb kind of comes in.
I think I've seen seasoned baristas use that behind the bar and barely lose any time, if nothing at all. But it requires technique, it requires training, obviously, on those tools in order to perform at that level. Yeah.
But it's interesting looking at WDT, something that you can pretty much use on any coffee and it's going to help. regardless. We move to something a little different now. Extract chilling, which is pouring your espresso or filter coffee over like a frozen bowl, and that's going to stop some of the volatile compounds escaping, and it's going to hopefully enhance the flavor of the coffee. But the problem is here, I feel like it enhances some coffees and doesn't on others, which in a competition, great, if you know it's going to help. But I feel like this hasn't trickled down or been as broadly used because it's so unpredictable.
Yeah, I think you touched on two important things. One is it's not necessarily better with every coffee. And in my experience, with some coffees, it will be substantially better. Like you'll make certain coffees, especially coffees that went through some sort of fermentation. So your naturals, your anaerobic naturals, generally will make these coffees taste substantially better. But with any more traditional wash coffee, it'll generally be worse. So that's one thing. But again, you could say, well, I'm only going to use it with anaerobic naturals. But I find that if you're brewing 5 coffees this way, it will taste different every single time. And again, like if you're at home, I don't necessarily think that's an issue. If you're in a competition, that's probably why we saw this a couple of years ago. And now there's barely anyone using that technique. But again, it takes some of the boxes. It doesn't take all of them. And that's the reason why we see it every now and then, but it hasn't been widely adopted.
What I do, and we also saw it before, because I know it was like Hugh Kelly did the bowls, little frozen bowls. But before that, we were seeing like portafilters. Was that Japan?
World
I can't
Championship,
yeah.
2016.
I mean, there's been people who have experimented with chilling the portafilters and also with chilling the cups, you know, the espresso cups that it goes into. Lots of different techniques.
It was used in like it's used by bartenders as well, like in various different techniques. I mean, a lot of the things that we see in the coffee industry are usually techniques or innovation that is borrowed from different industries, which I think is quite cool. And it's usually, I think, a great way to innovate, looking at what others are doing. So some of those techniques freeze chilling has been borrowed from the bartending industry, from what I recall. And again, like we've seen it on and off because, like you said, it works great. It works amazing with certain coffees, and it doesn't work with other coffees. And again, like that level of predictability means that it might be a bit too risky. So if you're a coffee competitor, if you're competing in a world championship, like you're trying to make the coffee taste as good as possible, but you also need it to be safe. Like you need a certain level of replicability and safety. And if you're making the car faster, but the car is going to crash or is more likely to crash, then that's probably not a risk that you want to be taking.
Yep. So I guess the takeaway from this is if you want to try this technique, this innovation in your own place, you can go out and purchase like the official freezing kind of situation there, the Paragon frozen balls. But then you can also mod something up yourself. Just want to make sure that it has like it can retain the cold temperature as the hot espresso runs over it, and then also that it doesn't dilute anything. So don't use ice.
My recommendation is buy a Scotch rock, like the whiskey rock, and then buy a drain little sieve, you know, those little
tea strainer.
Yeah, tea strainer or
they'll do a good job.
That kind of thing. And you just freeze it, hold it above with the ball and run your espresso over the top. And then also experiment with contact time, because it might be like for the first half of the extraction.
Then you're opening a can of worms. It's a rabbit hole.
But just freeze your portafilter, chuck it in the freezer, see how you go, have a play around.
But I think like Simon's mentioning, the key thing here is to keep your variables consistent and always be comparing the same coffee. So if you're extracting and say, okay, do I like this for washed El Salvador's? Great. Yes, no. Now let's try this with a natural Ethiopian. See what change, if any, it has for you. And it might just be added to your toolkit.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like you mentioned, change only one variable at the time. Even if you think that you know what this other variable is going to do, I would strongly argue that you need to change only one variable at the time. And that's the only way you can build.
Coming out.
That's the only way you can build this understanding of, okay, X variable will impact the coffee in A, B, C ways. And then, I mean, dialing in coffee or making better tasting coffee is just a combination of those experiences, those reference points that you've had in the past, and being able to correlate specific variables with a specific outcome, and being able to say, okay, we're tasting this coffee. This is starting point A. I want to take it to that finish point. What are the tools that I have in order to get there? But you can only get this understanding if you've done all of that work by isolating variables individually.
The next one is sitting right behind you.
And in front of you.
Oh, and in front. But
all around you.
we'll go this one first, and then we'll jump to
okay.
that one. What have we got behind us here? What is this contraption going on?
We have a machine called the Waved machine. It's a machine built by Waved Technology in Singapore. It's a Singaporean startup that makes tools that emit ultra-low frequency electromagnetic waves.
Oh, ultra low frequency electromagnetic waves. That's what I was thinking. Yeah, that's
Classic.
Yeah, classic. It's a mouthful. It's hard. Yeah.
And now, what would you say? Does that energize molecules, water molecules?
So what it does,
My homework.
The elevator pitch of this is it will energize water molecules. It will basically energize the OH bond between the water molecule, which will then have a whole bunch of different impacts afterwards. But the bottom line is when it's applied to coffee, it'll make the coffee taste sweeter and less bitter. So it'll reduce dryness, astringency, bitterness. It'll increase the perception of sweetness. That's the bottom line, like in a very shortest possible version.
Correct me if I'm wrong. The cool thing with this kind of innovation is people hear about it, experiment with it, and then they might be like, I technically don't really know what I'm doing here. I notice there's a difference. Let's figure out the science of it later. But we know that something is happening,
and that's literally, that's literally what happened to us. Like we tried it. I first tried it with Jack Simpson last year or year and a half ago when he was preparing for the World Championship, and I tried his espresso non-waved and his espresso put through the wave machine, and the difference was massive. Like there was the espresso without being waved was like meh. But after being waved, it had no more bitterness, it had no more dryness, it had so much clarity. There was a natural sweetness coming out. And you could still recognize the same coffee, but it was substantially better. And a few of these other anecdotes made us think, there's something here. Like we don't understand how it works, but let's talk to people who understand it and let's do a whole bunch of tests so that we can yield the best out of this technology.
You know what I saw that was cool that's outside of coffee with this? This waved machine, you can wave fresh juice without any additives, any preservatives, and it's going to make the shelf life of it last for 2 extra weeks. So we're taking stuff without adding sugars, preservatives, and now you can have completely fresh juice and it stays on there. Is that right?
Yeah, so it has an impact on the oxidation reduction potential. So basically it will make water more, or any beverage that you're putting it through, more antioxidants. So that's there are multiple different effects, but besides the energization of the
Does that mean coffee would taste better for longer or not?
So not necessarily. So that's one of the things that we had a whole bunch of hypotheses when we first started experimenting this, and we hired Nemo, who's sitting right there with us.
I've been looking for him for years.
Who's got a background in chemistry, and well, you found him now.
I found him. He's like, look at him, he hates me. He was just like, this idiot. He's like, I've heard that joke 5,000 times.
And yeah, well, Nemo has found the wave, and we're
just set up for that.
Oh, that was the last one. And yeah, we've been trying to understand the technology behind it, how it impacts coffee. But in the beginning, we were navigating in the dark, trying to understand what exactly is being impacted. And for example, my initial hypothesis was this antioxidant effect that it has on water or on coffee should make it taste better. When you wave a coffee, you definitely see that as the coffee cools down, you have incredible, immaculate temperature transitions. Like your coffee never goes sour, it never really goes dry. The temperature transitions are absolutely beautiful. And I attributed that to the antioxidants potential of the water or of the coffee that we have. And it turns out that doesn't actually have a major effect on the taste profile, but it seems that you can keep things longer. So if you do that on juices, you can keep that substantially longer. If you do that on cold brew, you could keep your cold brew from longer. But in terms of flavor impacts that it has in the cup, probably not a huge amount. But again, it's so complex that we are navigating in the dark. And a lot of the things, so there are things that we can understand from a scientific point of view, but at the end of the day, if we want to use this to make coffee taste better, it all comes down to what does it taste like in the cup. And a lot of the testing that we do they're all blind tasting, but it all comes down to, does this make coffee taste better? Can we predict the outcome every single time? So if we're doing a blind tasting of one coffee is not being waved, the others have been waved for different duration, can we systematically find the ones that have been waved and not waved? And it turns out that we can systematically find which ones have been waved. So it does have a predictable outcome. It's extremely noticeable. I think it's hard not to see the difference. And that for us is the kind of technology that we say, okay, it ticks all of the boxes except for maybe the practicality. Like the machine itself is a bit bulky, not necessarily user-friendly, but it's so potent that we go, okay, we want to explore this further because it does make the car faster.
Yeah, so cool. And then you've been experimenting as well with trying to like create little bottle waved as well, right?
So
can we talk about that? Sorry.
Yeah, 100%. So I mean, as you can see, the machine is quite bulky, and it takes actually a long time if you want to be waving your water. Like the waving process will take you a couple of minutes. If you do it directly in coffee, it'll be a very short amount of time. But I haven't had the best results waving coffee directly, but we've had the best results waving water directly. But it takes a long time. So you're in a cafe environment or at home, like no one's ever going to do that. The machine is around like $5,000-$6,000. So no one is ever going to buy that machine. I mean, very few cafes are going to buy that. So we're trying to find ways to yield the potential and the power of that technology and to put it into a product that is more easily accessible to everyone. So one of the things that we've been playing around is, can we, for example, wave the water that we use in our concentrates at APAX, and can this have some of the binding, energizing effects that the water had initially? Can this last in time? Can this give us the same outcome, the same results, but essentially in a portable version? Yeah. And that's what Nemo has been working on for the last 2 months so far. And it's just an interesting journey because as you were mentioning earlier, if one day this leads to a successful product and we have something that's, think of it like an APAX bottle on steroid. That's kind of like how I pitch it. The amount of failures and disgusting coffees that we've had, like no one really sees the behind the scenes, but it's usually him and I tasting a whole bunch of coffees all day long. And a lot of the coffees that we try are terrible. Like we've had coffees that smelled like swimming pool because there's other chemical reactions and byproduct that happen in the waving process. And we had coffees that literally like smell like chlorine that you'd have from a swimming pool. So yeah, there's a lot of like ups and downs in the innovation and research and development process. And a lot of people don't necessarily see those things.
Yeah. And the final one that is, I mean, obviously what we're talking about now, APAX Lab, is this feels like it's right on that peak of like hitting its peak in competition and that. And then
hopefully not crashing.
Yeah. But then seeing how it's trickling down, because we're seeing it like a lot into the home barista market, into cafes now is starting to stock it and that kind of thing. But if you look at a lot of these innovations with like predictable outcomes of like what you can do, I think with the APAX Labs is the believability. It's one of those things of like, you just got to try it to kind of understand it. Because it's one of those things that people will see and be like, oh, shut up. Like, dripping a little 2 drops into a cup. Yeah, what's that going to do? But it makes complete sense. All water comes with mineral components in it that are going to affect how we perceive it. We did a sensory episode the other week.
Yep.
Just talking about how, adding sugar to lemon is going to make you be like, oh, I can handle this now. It's not too sour.
Yeah, the perceived kind of intensity and the perceived how those different taste profiles interact with each other.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Coca-Cola, the acidity level in Coca-Cola is outrageous. And if you didn't have any sugar, it'd be impossible to drink because it's as acidic as lemon.
Yes.
And those relative levels of perception, I think, are key. And that's also one of the reasons why you can't measure everything. You can't put numbers behind everything because we as humans don't necessarily taste that way. And minerals definitely, because minerals influence the way we perceive different attributes. I mean, it makes sense that it makes a huge impact on the way we perceive different attributes in coffee, that minerals can increase acidity, perception of acidity, perception of sweetness of body. But you're right, like until you've tried it, I think people rightfully so people are skeptical. I would be very skeptical if
I was as well until we today is like a bit of a joke. We're like, well, we've seen it work with like high-end specialty coffee, but can we make like a crappy coffee taste good? And you and I went to the McDonald's drive-through. What I was shocked about was we did it with like the black coffee, and like, let's be honest, it didn't make it good. It made it drinkable. It went from the black coffee was thin, watery, tasted like tan bark and bitterness. And then with the drops in there, it actually added more like a bit of body to it, a bit of texture to it, and then removed some of that bitterness. And so it was much more drinkable. But the big one was the milk coffee we had there, which I wouldn't think. Adding the drops to the milk coffee kind of turned it from bitter, dusty, woody to like more of a caramel finish. And even the milk tasted creamier, which was crazy. So I thought it was going to affect the black coffee even more in that one. But the milk coffee was
Yeah, I think
Really
it's an interesting
transformed
thing. It actually works in any beverages. Like you put it in tea, you put it in whiskey, you put it in any. I mean, you put minerals in anything, even on
People
food.
using it for cocktails?
Yeah, I mean, these kind of droppers existed in the cocktail world
Right.
way before we launched the company. Like
Yeah.
usually in cocktail bars, they would do like a saline solution. So basically like salt and water just to be able to lift specific flavors in cocktails. But you can do that with, you can do that with many things. It's easy to add in cocktails. And again, as you mentioned, the outcome is, it's impactful because everyone can see the difference. It's predictable and it's replicable. So it kind of ticks all of these boxes of, okay, I can implement that in my everyday routine, or it's worth implementing behind the bar.
So we might be jumping a little bit ahead here. So to give people a foundation, what is APAX Lab? Talk us through the product and how it's modifying things.
Yeah, so APAX Lab is an Australian startup that makes mineral concentrates for coffee. So what we did is we basically scaled down all of the championship-winning water recipes that we had in the past into little bottles. And the idea of the bottles is that you get to either create your own brewing water with them, or you get to add the minerals directly into coffee. And I think that's kind of like the disruption that we've made in the market. This idea of being able to add minerals directly into your coffee after extraction was, I think, a little groundbreaking at the time, because everybody believed until then that minerals were essential for the extraction process. And it turns out that minerals really just impact the way we perceive different attributes. So what we thought was, because you don't necessarily need to have the minerals in your brewing water, you get to try a coffee and then improve it afterwards. So as we were trying this coffee here, we thought this coffee might lack a little bit of sweetness and a little bit of body. And it's very easy for me to go, okay, I'm going to add 2 drops in there. And with this specific profile, with that specific mineral composition, it will give some of that creaminess, some of that sweetness that we didn't have in the first place. And the way we usually pitch it is, it's seasoning for coffee. Like the way you would, when you're cooking, if you're making a dish, you think that this dish is lacking a bit of vibrancy, you would add a squeeze of lemon, you'd add a bit of vinegar, and that's like how you do seasoning. But in coffee, it didn't really exist, but minerals do a really good job at doing that. And what I think is interesting with minerals is that, as opposed to you adding sugar or anything else, is that it works really well with the natural characteristics of whatever you're adding into. So if you add minerals into water, you might notice a tiny difference in the texture and the viscosity of the water, but it only really makes a huge impact when it's combined with something that has, a potential for a lot of acidity or sweetness, and it kind of like really doubles down on that sweetness, doubles down on that acidity. So it works really well with coffee in order to like increase or decrease specific attributes.
Yeah, that's cool. So I think for people wanting to experiment with it, the easiest way is you can just get APAX Lab, because there's multiple different minerals in each one, right, that are going to kind of balance it out. And you've worked really hard to master that. But you can also just play around with stuff you have in your cupboard as well. Like table salt. You can use that for bitterness, would you say?
Yeah, sodium. So table salt is sodium chloride. These 2 ions, so you have sodium in there and you have chloride. They act in different ways. Sodium will increase the brightness generally in coffee, and chloride will add a lot of sweetness. Yeah. So, and sodium is good for intensity as well. So in general, you add that to coffee, boom, more intensity, potentially a bit less bitterness, because the chloride is going to add that layer of sweetness, which might mask that bitterness.
And then for like, if you had a super sour coffee, maybe you'd add bicarb.
Oh yeah, sodium bicarbonate. Yep.
Magnesium.
Yeah, Epsom salts. That's that magnesium sulfate. So you can add sodium bicarbonate. You can easily buy that from any grocery store. So sodium will do that same thing as I mentioned for the sodium chloride, but bicarbonate will do an amazing job at neutralizing the acidity in coffee.
The buffer, yeah.
Yeah.
Also a cool tip with that is, how soy milk curdles sometimes when you pour it, especially into highly acidic coffees. If you add like a little bicarbonate dilution into your soy milk when you pour, you can actually stop it from splitting and going all chunky in that, which is super cool.
You can add it to your coffee, you can add it to the milk. But yeah, you want to equalize. The bicarbonate will raise the pH of the coffee, and therefore it won't curdle with the milk.
Getting a little steamy?
You're a little hot in here?
I'm hot. Is it because you're looking so hot?
Might be.
You've been working out. You look buff.
I don't know about that one, but I think it is time for
an extra hot take with 2 sugars. 2 sugars. You know what? I don't know about you. I'm forfeiting my hot take this week.
You're taking a pass.
Yeah, I'm taking a pass because we got the old Gautherin in the house. That's what I call him. That's what you called, right? The Gautherin.
Yeah, only
Only by me.
Only here by you.
only you.
I'm going to forfeit mine. I don't know if you got one, Ben. Do you have a hot take?
I got a little.
All right.
I got a little.
There you go. I'm going to
something,
forfeit
something.
mine then. Simon, hit us with your hot take, baby.
All right. I have a hot take and I have a warm take.
Oh, yeah.
Which one do you want first?
Let's go warm. Build up their temperature.
Okay, let's
you know?
do that. Yeah, let's go gradually. The reason why espresso doesn't taste good is not because of the coffee. And until we make profound changes, espresso will still taste bad. And that's because of the water that we use. So espressos taste bad and they will taste bad until we get to change water.
I mean, that's a pretty hot take. I'm excited to see what the hot take is if this is the mild one.
That's just
Wait,
the
so
warm?
just espresso in general just
Espresso
tastes
in general
bad.
tastes terrible.
Everywhere.
Everywhere. And that's because machines that we use to make espresso, for the majority, whether it's commercial or domestic, have boilers made of stainless steel. And because boilers are made of stainless steel, it means that there are specific minerals, specific ions we can't use because they will damage that boiler. So essentially, we made espresso machines that are designed to not optimize flavors of coffee. So basically, the water we use in espresso machines are designed to preserve the machine, not to make coffee taste good. And
Right.
there's not a single cafe in the whole country right now that has a water that is optimal for their coffee. The water that every cafe has is optimal for the safety of the machine. So we're so far, but like we are millions of years away from imagining how good espresso could be if we had optimal water for coffee.
I did a hot take once saying Italian espresso is bad. Now we've got Simon just saying espresso in general is bad. So what do you make the boiler out of then? Teflon?
There are a couple of solutions. So Teflon, I think, would be the most realistic. You
The
could
old
look at
cancer boiler.
titanium. You could look at titanium. That would be the most
Oh.
expensive. So just to summarize, there's basically like 3 types of ions that would be problematic for boilers. The first one would be chloride. Chloride cause corrosion in boilers, and you definitely don't want any chloride. But unfortunately, chloride tastes amazing. That chlorides are like top tier ions. They provide so much sweetness, so much body in coffee. People confuse chloride and chlorine. They are 2 different things. But chloride, which you can find under the form of sodium chloride, so that's your table salt. Chloride tastes absolutely amazing in coffee, and every water should have some sort of chloride. If you don't have chloride, you lose so much sweetness, so much body. So first issue with stainless steel boilers is chloride. And the second issue is scaling that you can have from a formation of bicarbonate and calcium or bicarbonate and magnesium. So that means that the ratio of bicarbonate and calcium has to be balanced. And in certain proportions, you'll start having scaling, which is also an issue. You wouldn't have that with other materials such as titanium, but titanium is crazy expensive. So I can't imagine
Might be
how
a little restrictive.
Yeah, but you have other materials such as like glass wouldn't be an issue, ceramic boilers wouldn't be an issue. There are other issues. I'm not saying that this is a miracle solution, but I'm just saying you could use any water with these boilers, or Teflon, for example. Teflon wouldn't have this issue. Like you could have any water in there that is optimized to make coffee taste better, and you wouldn't have any issue with like corrosion. We don't have an issue with scaling. Or more simply, removing boilers from machine and using induction and using heat transfer in order to heat up water. So you'd heat up water more efficiently, and in that sense, like the water wouldn't be stored into a boiler for a longer period of time.
Which changes things as well,
Yeah,
right?
that means you're saving so much energy. That's probably the most realistic answer. Like how do you save energy? By doing heat transfer. So you only heat up the small amount of water that you need to pull an espresso. An espresso takes about like 100 grams of water. So you're only heating up a small amount of water. It heats up very quickly because there's a small amount of water to heat up. And because it's not staying in a boiler for a long time in a hot temperature, then you can have any sort of like mineral makeup in there.
Now hit me with that hot. If that's the mild take, hit me with that hot take.
All right. Hot take is, sorry guys, but Melbourne is no longer the world capital of coffee. And the new world capital of coffee is Paris.
Paris. Womp, womp, womp. What do
Does that
they do in
surprise you?
Paris? Yeah, it does.
Well, first of all, not because I'm from Paris, but
Sure.
Sure, nothing
that has
to do with it.
nothing to do with that. Paris, so I'm originally from Paris. I moved to Australia 9.5 years ago. When I left the country, there was absolutely nothing specialty coffee-wise. I think France and Paris in general were way behind any other European country. Like you look at Copenhagen in Denmark, London in the UK, were so far ahead of Paris. And in the last 5 years, every single year, there's more and more specialty cafes. And the kind of specialty cafes that you see are not the kind of specialty cafes that you see in Australia. I'm not talking like a blend and a single origin and 12 different milk options. I'm talking pour over menus with geishas and literally like 10, 12 coffee options. And as of today, 2025, like you'll find maybe like 20, 30 cafes in Paris itself that would serve the craziest pour over menu, craziest espresso menu with, coffees from all around the world, from some of the best farms in the world. And there's a momentum right now in Paris that I've never seen in any other country in the world. And I've done 5 continents in 5 months this year, like been to all major capital cities in the world. And I have to say, Paris in 2025 is surprisingly out of this world.
I can't say no because I haven't been there, but it must have taken a huge U-turn because I was there like 8-10 years ago, and it was pretty much every cafe was like an automatic button press machine.
And if you had told me this 3 years ago, I would be like, nah, I don't see that happening. But every single year I go back and I'm like, my God, there's like another 5 cafes who are like absolutely amazing. And the crazy thing is these cafes are all busy. So they're all doing well financially. There are people out there paying 20, 30 euros for a filter, and there are cafes living just off that, which cool. I think is really cool. So I think it happened in an exponential way. I think no one could have seen that coming in 10 years ago. Even like 2 years ago, there was none of that. And I think 2025, when I got back, that was absolutely amazing. Nemo has worked in Paris in some of the best cafes. He's worked for Tanat. They have multiple cafes. You should have a look at their menu, the setup. They only do coffee. They don't do any food. And when you're only doing one thing, when you're not doing brunch, when you're not doing any pastries, of course you're more likely to beat everyone else. But in Australia, you rarely see cafes doing only coffee. There's very few.
So if someone's going to Paris, top 3, where should they go?
Okay, Motors, and then Tanat, and then I'll have to give 4. I would recommend Substance. Substance is a very unique cafe. They open at 12. They don't serve coffee in the morning. They're closed on weekends, and you have to book. But it's worth the detour. It's probably the craziest coffee experience you will have. And the last one would be Terre de Café. They have multiple stores around Paris. They're doing an amazing job at bringing that to the masses. I think they're one of the oldest specialty coffee company, and they're doing a phenomenal job at bridging the gap in between specialty coffee and the mass markets, which I think is sometimes a struggle that some countries have. Like being able to bring specialty coffee to the mass market is sometimes a challenge, and these guys have done a phenomenal job.
You know what I'm hearing, Ron? Time
to go to Paris.
Yep. It's just coffee. Hits the road.
Patty.
Sure, Patty. Let's move that one up.
No.
All right. I'm going to hit you with my little hot take here.
Hit me.
So my hot take is that within the next 12, maybe 24 months, on every specialty coffee menu around the world will be a Ugandan coffee.
Oh.
Okay. In some form or another. There is so much energy going on in Uganda at the moment as an origin, and it has incredible untapped potential, but I think people are cluing in, and they're starting to go, okay, if I need large volume, good quality specialty coffee, washed Arabicas, or maybe some high quality fine Robustas, it's there. I want some experimental, interesting, highly processed kind of coffees. Those micro lots, they're there. There's actually a huge range, a diverse range of regions, and only some of them have been known. So there's all of this discovery, or at least promotion of them. And I think it's just like the hot location for really supporting great specialty coffee in lots of different ways. So keep your eyes out.
Wow.
That's a big call. Mm-hmm. What's it like price-wise? Is it more accessible than some of the other?
Yeah, the production, the volume is really high in terms of the productivity coming out of Uganda. So there's a lot of great quantity. I think that the pricing is like really competitive globally, depending on where you are for the volume lots. And there's the specialty stuff that's out there as well.
So you're saying Uganda is the Colombia of Africa?
Yeah,
like experimenting, doing crazy things.
Yeah. There's just so much great energy from like the government-led initiatives, but also from specific exporters and producers. There's a lot of really exciting stuff. Yeah.
All right. I said I didn't have a hot take. This isn't a hot take. This is just a statement of like where we were talking about before. But the future of milk for coffee is blended milks. I'm not talking about just like almond milk or cashew. I'm saying from dairy to cashew to almond, whatever the best elements from each milk, it's going to be blended together and you're going to start seeing a lot more of that on the market.
I mean,
Yeah. It's not really a hot take. It's just what's going to happen.
just call
You
it.
can predict the
It's just what it
future.
is. Well, you say it's just happening. It's there.
Well, we've dove into the world of innovation here, which has been great to unpack the implication
fun.
of the comps. Yeah. We've got like a last little segment here. I don't know if you're prepared for this.
Oh, he's
Simon,
prepared.
But
Born ready.
we love to share some of the love out there and shine a light on someone who maybe isn't getting as much attention as you think they deserve. Do you have a bit of a shout out that you'd like to give to someone in the industry?
Yeah, I do. I think, well, that's someone who is getting a lot of attention right now, but maybe not so much from Australia or from some of the consuming countries, but someone who I think has made a profound impact in producing countries. And that's my very, very, very close friend, Carlos Escobar. Carlos Escobar, who recently came third in the World Brewers Cup Championship. He's lived in Australia for 10 years and recently, a couple of years ago, went back to Colombia to pursue his dream of helping Colombia grow their specialty coffee scene, whether it's from a production point of view, but also consumption point of view. He's done a phenomenal job at giving momentum to coffee producing countries in Central, South America, just all around Latin America, giving producers hope, inspiring new generations of coffee producers. He often says, he uses that as an example, which I think is crazy. But the average coffee producer in Colombia is, guess how old the average coffee producer in Colombia is?
No idea.
58.
Yeah, close. It's like 60 years old. So new generations don't want to work in farms because it's hard work. It's difficult. The reward is not there. Coffee price fluctuates, and it's very difficult to find new generations. And we're going to struggle finding coffee if we don't have new generations going into coffee farms. And he's done a phenomenal job at inspiring new generations of coffee producers, of making coffee production cool again, in a sense, but also in pushing this internal consumption of great coffee in Colombia. And as you can probably imagine, Colombia produces some of the best coffee in the world, but most of that coffee goes out of the country. And he's recently started a roasting company where he keeps some of that best coffee produced in Colombia and roasts it for Colombians. So he's doing a phenomenal job at promoting that coffee culture within the country and within all of Central South America. We don't necessarily see that in Australia, but yeah, his impact is absolutely amazing. So
We love
What
him.
a legend.
Yeah, skilled guy, great person.
yeah, you know him, yeah.
All right. What an episode. Now, Simon, where can people find you? Where can they find APAX Lab?
So you can find APAX Lab on Instagram at APAX Lab and on our website as well, apaxlab.com. The products might seem very technical, but they're actually very intuitive to use. But if you're actually interested in all of the science and research, we have so much content, both on the Instagram and on the website, if this is a rabbit hole that you want to dive into.
And if you don't care and just want to put a dropper in your coffee, then you can do that too, which I've done. I've looked at both. I tried to read the information about it and had no understanding at all what was happening. But I tell you what, the coffee tasted better.
Yeah, that's the important thing. What's in the cup?
Yep. And if you want to reach out to us, thank you for listening to the episode. You can find us at
Hello, it's just coffeepod.com.
Yep. Hello at It's Just Coffee.
Hello, it's just
Hello,
coffee.
It's Just Coffee.
Hi. Just wave at us across the street.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can find us on all the socials. It's Just Coffee. We're going to be at Host if you're there. Make sure to let us know. We'll catch up. We'll say hello.
Drop us a DM.
Let us know if there's anyone that you want us to be chatting with. And of course, the numbers are going great and they can always go better. If you found this episode interesting, make sure to share it with a friend, someone in the industry, someone who loves coffee. Tell them that Simon was on and you have to listen.
Yeah, all of the knowledge drops.
Yeah. Thank you. It's been great. I know I don't want to be rude here, but you did send a pretty intimate message to Ben before the podcast. Ben, what did Simon message you?
We message and don't tell.
Oh, okay.
that's all.
Well, with
I'm scared now.
what's APAX Lab catchphase or tagline?
Oh, reach coffee climax?
There you go. I think it was something similar to that. We'll see you next week, guys.
Oh, goodness.